My name is Sarah Matthews, and I'm about to tell you about the night my stepfamily publicly humiliated me at their charity gala in front of Boston's elite. They called me a waitress, had security escort me out, and filmed it all for their entertainment. But what they didn't know was that my husband, the billionaire secretly funding their entire event, was about to walk through those doors. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, stick around because this story shows what happens when the tables turn in the most unexpected way. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and if you love stories about family karma and sweet justice, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of revenge and redemption. To understand why my stepmother would orchestrate such a public humiliation, we need to go back to where it all began. I was born into what looked like a fairy tale, the Matthews family of Boston. My father, Robert Matthews, built a financial empire from nothing, creating Matthews Investment Group that catered to New England's wealthiest families. My mother, Grace, was his perfect partner, handling the social connections and charity work that came with Dad's success. For the first 9 years of my life, we were everything you'd see in a family magazine. Dad would take me to his office on Saturdays, teaching me about business while Mom and I painted watercolors in her studio. She always said I had artistic talent, that creativity was a gift to be nurtured. Sunday dinners were sacred, just the three of us, sharing stories and dreams. Then everything shattered. Mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at 35. The doctors gave her 6 months, she fought for 8. The woman who taught me to see beauty in everything slowly faded away, and with her went the warmth that held our family together. Dad was destroyed. He threw himself into work, staying at the office until midnight, taking business trips that lasted weeks. I spent my days with a rotation of nannies who were kind but couldn't fill the massive void Mom left behind. At 9 years old, I was essentially an orphan with a living father. For 2 years, we existed in this fog of grief. Then Elaine Parker entered our lives at the Children's Hospital benefit, ironically, the same type of event where our story would eventually come full circle. She was stunning, sophisticated, and seemed genuinely interested in helping Dad heal. More importantly to my lonely heart, she paid attention to me. "You have your mother's eyes," she'd say, stroking my hair. "I can see why your father adores you so much." Within 6 months, they were engaged. Elaine moved into our Beacon Hill mansion with her daughter Jessica, who was exactly my age. I was thrilled. Finally, I'd have a sister and the mother figure I'd been desperately missing. The changes started subtly. Jessica got the larger bedroom because she needed more space for her things. I got moved to the smaller room down the hall. When I asked why, Elaine smiled sweetly and said, "We're blending families, sweetheart. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices." Christmas that first year was eye-opening. Jessica unwrapped gift after gift: jewelry, designer clothes, a new laptop. My pile was noticeably smaller, and the gifts were practical: school supplies, basic clothes. When I looked confused, Elaine explained, "Your father and I discussed it. We don't want you girls to compete over material things. We're teaching you both different values." Different values. Jessica learned the value of luxury. I learned the value of disappointment. The psychological warfare was masterful. Elaine never outright said I wasn't wanted, but her actions spoke volumes. She'd schedule family activities when she knew I had art class, then tell Dad I was being antisocial. She'd buy Jessica expensive writing lessons while postponing my art supplies because money was tight. "Sarah seems resentful," I'd overhear her telling Dad. "I'm trying so hard to connect with her, but she's building walls. Maybe she needs therapy." The therapy suggestion came with an underlying message: I was the problem child who couldn't adjust to the new family dynamic. Dad, exhausted from grief and work, accepted her narrative without question. By the time I turned 13, I'd become a ghost in my own home. Jessica had claimed not just the prime bedroom, but also the study where I used to do homework, the art room where Mom and I painted, and most importantly, Dad's attention. "Dad, can you help me with my science project?" I'd ask. "Sarah, can't you see I'm helping Jessica with her college applications?" he'd respond, not even looking up from her paperwork. College applications. At 13, Jessica was already planning her future with Dad's full support, while I was struggling to get 5 minutes of his time. The worst part was watching him smile at Jessica the way he used to smile at me. She'd tell him about her day, and his face would light up with genuine interest. When I tried to share my achievements, making honor roll, winning a regional art competition, I'd get a distracted, "That's nice, sweetheart," before he'd turn back to whatever Elaine was discussing. Elaine had perfected the art of subtle sabotage. She'd volunteer to help with my school projects, then forget to pick up supplies. She'd promise to attend my art shows, then cancel last minute due to family emergencies that somehow never affected Jessica's events. "I'm so sorry, darling," she'd say with practiced sympathy. You understand that Jessica's horse show is the same day as your art exhibition, and she's been preparing for months. The message was clear: Jessica's interests mattered more than mine. Always, the financial disparity became impossible to ignore. Jessica got a new car for her 16th birthday, a sleek BMW that she flaunted around school. I got a used Honda that barely ran, presented as a lesson in appreciating what you have. Your father and I want you to understand the value of hard work, Elaine explained as Jessica revved her engine in the driveway. Starting from the bottom builds character. Meanwhile, Jessica was building her college fund with Dad's generous contributions, while I was told to apply for scholarships and financial aid. The irony wasn't lost on me, the daughter of a millionaire being told she needed to earn her education. I threw myself into part-time jobs, working at the local library, tutoring younger students, anything to save money for college. While Jessica enjoyed shopping sprees and European vacations, I was counting pennies and eating ramen noodles. Dad occasionally surfaced from his Elaine-induced fog, showing glimpses of the father I remembered. He'd appear at my part-time job, unexpectedly, looking surprised to find me working. "You don't need to work so hard, sweetheart," he'd say. "We can help with college." But any offers of help had to go through Elaine, who'd find reasons why financial assistance wasn't in my best interest. "Sarah needs to learn independence," she'd tell him. "We're doing her a favor by not making things too easy." The cruelest part was how she'd reframe my struggles as character building while simultaneously providing Jessica with every advantage. It was gaslighting on a family-wide scale. The summer before my senior year, Dad had a massive heart attack at his office. The call came at 3 a.m., Elaine's panicked voice saying they were rushing to Mass General Hospital. I threw on clothes and called an Uber, my hands shaking as I tried to process what was happening. When I arrived at the hospital, I found Elaine and Jessica in the waiting room, both impeccably dressed despite the early hour. Something about that struck me as odd. Who gets fully dressed and puts on makeup for a medical emergency? "How is he?" I asked, still in my pajamas and sneakers. "They're working on him," Elaine said, her voice perfectly controlled. It was massive. "They're not sure." We waited for 6 hours. I held on to hope, praying for a miracle, remembering every good moment I'd shared with Dad. Maybe this crisis would bring us closer together. Maybe he'd realize how much he'd missed of my life. The doctor finally emerged, his expression grave. "I'm sorry. We did everything we could." Dad was gone. At 58, Robert Matthews had worked himself to death, leaving behind an empire and a family that was about to implode. The funeral was a spectacle. Elaine played the grieving widow perfectly, accepting condolences with dignified grace. Jessica clung to her mother's side, the picture of a devastated stepdaughter. I stood apart, forgotten even in my grief. "Your father was so proud of you girls," people kept saying to Jessica and me. But I noticed they looked at Jessica when they said it, as if she was the real daughter and I was just an afterthought. The will reading 2 weeks later revealed the extent of my erasure. Dad had left the bulk of his estate, including the house, the business, and most of his investments, to Elaine. Jessica received substantial trust funds and several properties. I was left with a college fund that would cover tuition and living expenses for 4 years, and a small inheritance that might fund a year of modest living after graduation. "Your father wanted to make sure you learned independence," Elaine explained, with false sympathy. "He knew you were strong enough to make your own way in the world." Strong enough. The word stung because it implied choice, as if I'd chosen to be financially cut off from my family's wealth. Jessica's trust fund was worth more than my inheritance and college fund combined. She'd never need to work a day in her life, while I was being told that struggle would build character. The cruelest part came after the lawyers left. Elaine's mask finally slipped. "You need to find your own place," she said coldly. "This house is too big for just the 3 of us, and Jessica needs her space." "3 of us?" I repeated, confused. "Jessica, myself, and your father's memory," she clarified. "You're 18 now, Sarah. It's time you learned to take care of yourself." I was being evicted from my childhood home, erased from the family narrative as if I'd never existed. Jessica watched from the doorway as I packed my belongings, a smirk playing at her lips. "Don't forget to return the house key," she called out as I loaded my car with everything I owned. "We're changing the locks anyway." The next 6 years were a masterclass in survival and self-discovery. I moved into a tiny studio apartment in Cambridge, working multiple jobs to pay for college while maintaining my grades. I graduated with honors in art history and found a position at Meridian Gallery, a boutique space in Boston's South End that specialized in contemporary artists. The work was demanding but fulfilling. I loved discovering new talent, helping artists navigate the complex art world, and occasionally finding that perfect piece that would speak to a collector's soul. My tiny apartment became a sanctuary filled with beautiful, affordable art from The artists I represented. I built a chosen family of close friends who knew nothing about my biological family drama. To them, I was just Sarah, the gallery girl who worked too hard and had an eye for emerging talent. They accepted me for who I was, not who I was connected to. For the first time in years, I felt valued for my abilities rather than judged for my perceived deficiencies. My colleagues respected my opinions, my boss trusted me with important clients, and artists sought my advice on their careers. The Matthews family faded into the background of my life. I'd see Elaine's name occasionally in the society pages, always connected to some charity event or social function. Jessica's Instagram showed a life of luxury, European vacations, designer clothes, and expensive restaurants. I felt nothing looking at these glimpses into their world, not jealousy, not anger, just indifference. At 25, I'd found my rhythm. Work, art, friends, and the occasional relationship that never quite developed into something serious. I was content, if not entirely happy. I'd learned to define success on my own terms rather than through the lens of family approval. Then, on a rainy Tuesday in October, everything changed. I was cataloging new paintings when a man walked into the gallery. He was tall, casually dressed in dark jeans and a navy sweater, with the kind of confident posture that suggested he was used to being listened to. "Can I help you find anything specific?" I asked, approaching with my standard greeting. He turned, and I was struck by his warm brown eyes and genuine smile. "I'm just browsing, but I'm curious about this artist," he said, gesturing to a series of abstract paintings. "That's Marcus Rivera," I explained, falling into my element. He's relatively new, but his work explores themes of urban isolation and human connection. The way he uses negative space to represent the emotional distance we create in crowded cities is particularly striking. We spent the next hour discussing art, philosophy, and the stories behind various pieces. He asked thoughtful questions and genuinely listened to my answers, a refreshing change from the typical wealthy collectors who often treated gallery staff as mere salespeople. "You really know your artists," he commented as our impromptu tour concluded. "I believe in what they're creating," I replied simply. "It's easy to be passionate about work that matters." He nodded thoughtfully. "I feel the same way about technology when it's designed to solve real problems, not just generate profit." As he was leaving, he handed me his business card. "I'm interested in supporting some of these artists. Could we continue this conversation over coffee?" I glanced at the card and felt my heart skip. The name read, Daniel Reed, CEO, Reed Technologies. I'd heard of Reed Technologies. They were revolutionizing sustainable energy solutions and had been making headlines for their innovative approach to corporate responsibility. "I'd like that," I managed, trying not to show my surprise. Our coffee meeting extended into dinner when our conversation about art and technology flowed well past the cafe's closing time. Daniel was refreshingly down to earth for someone of his stature, talking about his middle-class upbringing in Portland and his parents' initial skepticism about his entrepreneurial dreams. "They thought I was crazy to leave grad school," he admitted with a laugh. "But they supported me anyway. Mom still sends care packages when she thinks I'm working too hard." I found myself sharing more than I'd intended, my love for art, my dreams of eventually opening a gallery focused on therapeutic art programs, my belief that creativity could heal trauma. I carefully avoided mentioning my family situation, focusing on my present rather than my past. "You light up when you talk about art therapy," Daniel observed over dessert. "There's something powerful about watching someone discover their passion." We began seeing each other regularly, though Daniel was careful never to flaunt his wealth. He'd suggest simple activities, walks along the Charles River, visits to small museums, quiet dinners at neighborhood restaurants. His modest townhouse in Back Bay reflected his values, comfortable but not ostentatious, filled with books and art rather than status symbols. "Money complicates things," he told me one evening when I asked about his lifestyle choices. "I've seen what happens when people start believing their worth is tied to their bank account. I never want to be that person." 3 months into our relationship, Daniel gently broached the subject I'd been avoiding. "You never talk about your family," he said carefully. "I've told you all about my parents' terrible dad jokes and my sister's environmental activism, but I know nothing about yours." I stared at my wine glass, debating how much to reveal. "There's not much to tell. My mom died when I was young, my dad remarried, then he died too. My stepmother and I were not close." The silence stretched between us, but instead of pushing, Daniel created a space that I unexpectedly wanted to fill. That night, I told him everything, about Elaine's manipulation, Jessica's cruelty, my father's emotional abandonment, and my eventual exclusion from the family. "The hardest part isn't the money," I admitted, tears finally breaking through my carefully constructed composure. "It's knowing that my father died believing I didn't need him, that somehow I wasn't worth fighting for." Daniel listened without interruption, his hand steady in mine. When I finished, he didn't offer platitudes or express pity. Instead, he said simply, "They failed you, Sarah. Not the other way around." Those words began healing something I didn't even realize was broken. For years, I'd carried the fear that perhaps I'd been unlovable, difficult, somehow deserving of being cast aside. Daniel's certainty that the fault lay with them, not me, was revolutionary. As our relationship deepened, Daniel never pressured me to reconnect with Elaine and Jessica. He understood my need for distance and respected the boundaries I'd established. Instead, he introduced me to his own family, warm, welcoming parents who treated me like a daughter from our first meeting. "We're so happy Daniel found you," his mother, Carol, said during my first visit to Portland. "He's been different since he started dating you, more grounded, more joyful." His sister Emma quickly became the sibling I'd always wanted, texting me pictures of her environmental activism work and asking for advice about everything from career decisions to relationship drama. After 18 months together, Daniel proposed during a weekend trip to Nantucket. It wasn't elaborate, just the two of us walking on the beach at sunset when he stopped, took both my hands, and asked if I'd build a life with him. "I love you for your compassion, your resilience, and your ability to see beauty where others see only chaos," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "You've changed how I see the world, Sarah. I want to face whatever comes next with you beside me." We married 3 months later in an intimate ceremony at his parents' home in Portland. 30 guests, close friends, and Daniel's family. No one from my side attended because there was no one to invite. Elaine and Jessica had no idea I was even in a relationship, let alone married to one of Boston's most eligible bachelors. It wasn't about secrecy or shame, it was about protection. The life I was building with Daniel was precious and pure, untainted by the toxicity of my past. I had no desire to invite that negativity back into my world, even to showcase my happiness. 2 years into our marriage, I'd settled into a happiness I'd never imagined possible. Daniel and I had found our rhythm. He'd revolutionized sustainable technology while I'd been promoted to assistant director at Meridian Gallery. We were discussing starting a family when the cream-colored envelope arrived. I almost discarded it with the other formal invitations Daniel regularly received, but the return address made my blood run cold: the Matthews Family Foundation. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was an invitation to the annual Boston Children's Hospital Benefit Gala, hosted by Elaine Matthews. A handwritten note was attached: "Sarah, it's been far too long. The family would love to reconnect." Elaine, I stared at the flowing script, searching for sincerity and finding none. In the 7 years since my father's death, Elaine had made exactly 0 attempts to contact me. The family certainly hadn't missed me when I was struggling to pay rent or when I graduated with no one in the audience cheering for me. When Daniel came home that evening, I was still sitting at our kitchen island, the invitation spread before me like evidence of a crime. "What's that?" he asked, kissing my cheek before noticing my expression. I pushed the invitation toward him. "My stepmother has suddenly remembered my existence." Daniel read it, his brow furrowing. "The Boston Children's Hospital Benefit, that's..." He stopped, looking uncomfortable. "That's what?" I prompted. He sat beside me with a sigh. "That's one of the events the Reed Foundation is sponsoring this year. We're the primary anonymous donor." My heart nearly stopped. "Your foundation is funding Elaine's gala?" "I didn't know it was connected to your stepmother," he said quickly. "The foundation handles most partnerships independently. I only review the major initiatives." The coincidence seemed impossible. She must have found out about us. That's the only explanation for this sudden interest in reconnecting. "It's possible," Daniel agreed. "Your married name is Reed now, and we've been in the society pages occasionally." I pushed the invitation away. "Well, it doesn't matter. I'm not going." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "What if we did go?" I looked at him like he'd suggested swimming with sharks. Why would I voluntarily put myself in a room with people who made it clear I wasn't good enough for them? "Because you are good enough," Daniel said firmly. "More than good enough. And maybe there's something powerful about facing them on your own terms, not theirs." "There's nothing to gain," I protested. "Elaine isn't suddenly going to become the loving stepmother I needed. This isn't about her, Sarah. It's about you finding closure," Daniel said gently. "You've built an incredible life despite how they treated you. Maybe seeing them again will help you finally put that chapter to rest." I considered his words. There was something appealing about walking into that gala confident and successful, no longer the discarded stepdaughter desperate for approval. "There's another factor," Daniel added. "The Reed Foundation's involvement is completely anonymous. Elaine has no idea I'm the primary donor." "Why anonymous?" I asked, curious. "It's how we handle certain philanthropic efforts. The foundation staff thought it would encourage more community involvement if it wasn't seen as just another Reed project. A thought began forming in my mind. So Elaine has no idea that her stepdaughter is married to the man funding her precious Gala? Daniel's eyes met mine, a slight smile playing at his lips. None whatsoever. For the first time since receiving the invitation, I felt something other than dread. That could be interesting. We spent the next hour planning. I would attend alone initially, giving myself time to interact with Elaine and the family. Daniel would arrive later, after I'd had a chance to gauge the situation. The revelation of our connection would happen naturally, in front of everyone. Are you sure about this? Daniel asked after we'd worked out the details. We can still decline. Your well-being matters more than any dramatic moment. I thought about his question carefully. Part of me was terrified at the prospect of facing Elaine, Jessica, and the extended family who'd so easily discarded me. But another part, a stronger part, was tired of carrying the weight of their rejection. I want to do this, I said finally. Not for revenge, but for resolution. I've spent too many years letting their opinion define my worth. The Fairmont Copley Plaza ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and elaborate white orchid arrangements when I arrived at 7 sharp. Attendants in crisp uniforms directed Boston's elite through the grand entrance, where a photographer captured arrivals against a backdrop featuring the Matthews Family Foundation logo. I took a deep breath, smoothed my midnight blue gown, a stunning piece from a designer whose work I'd featured at the gallery, and approached the check-in table. Good evening, Sarah Reed, I said to the young woman managing the guest list. She scanned her tablet, then looked up with a professional smile. Yes, Mrs. Reed. Welcome to the annual Boston Children's Hospital Benefit Gala. As I entered the ballroom, I felt strangely calm. The space was already filled with familiar faces from Boston's social register, old money families, successful entrepreneurs, politicians, and local celebrities. I recognized many from the society pages where Daniel occasionally appeared. The first familiar face belonged to my father's cousin Margaret, who was examining silent auction items with her husband. Sarah, she said, squinting at me in surprise. Sarah Matthews? Is that really you? It's Sarah Reed now, I corrected gently. How are you, Margaret? She looked me up and down with undisguised curiosity. Well, you've certainly grown up. We haven't seen you since your father's funeral. What have you been doing with yourself? Before I could answer, her husband joined us. Matthews, oh, Elaine's stepdaughter. Didn't know you were invited this year. The subtle emphasis on this year made it clear I hadn't been included in previous events. Elaine kindly reached out, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. The children's hospital is such an important cause. Margaret nodded distractedly, her attention already drifting to more important guests. Yes. Elaine has quite the talent for fundraising. You should find her. She's holding court by the main donor table with Jessica and the Wellington family. I followed her gesture and spotted Elaine near the center of the room. At 57, she remained striking, her blonde hair expertly styled, her figure maintained through what I suspected was a combination of personal trainers and subtle cosmetic procedures. Beside her stood Jessica, now 28 like me, but looking younger in a designer crimson dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary. Taking a steadying breath, I collected a champagne flute from a passing server and made my way toward them. Jessica saw me first. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose to her hairline before she leaned over to whisper something in Elaine's ear. My stepmother turned, her practiced social smile freezing momentarily before transforming into something that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sarah. What a surprise, Elaine exclaimed, her voice carrying enough for nearby guests to hear. I wasn't entirely sure you'd actually come. Despite sending me a personal invitation, the lie was so blatant I almost smiled. I wouldn't miss it. I replied instead. The Children's Hospital does such vital work. Jessica looked me over with obvious assessment. Interesting dress. Is that off the rack? Actually, it's from an emerging designer I work with at the gallery, I explained, refusing to be baited. Oh, you're still at that little art shop? Elaine asked with exaggerated surprise. How persistent of you. Before I could respond, an older gentleman in our circle, one of the hospital board members, judging by his name tag, interjected. You work in the arts, young lady? Elaine answered before I could. Sarah has always had creative aspirations. Nothing serious, of course. Actually, I countered, finding my voice, I'm the assistant director at Meridian Gallery now. We specialize in contemporary artists and therapeutic art programs. The man looked genuinely interested, but Elaine smoothly redirected the conversation. Speaking of hospital programs, Dr. Harrison, you simply must hear about the new pediatric wing renovation we're funding this year. I was effectively dismissed from the conversation. As I stepped back, Jessica followed. Seriously, Sarah, why? Are you here? She asked, dropping all pretense of politeness now that we were out of earshot. Nobody expected you to actually show up. Then why send the invitation? I challenged. Jessica's smile was cold. Mom thought it would be the proper thing to do, given the anniversary of your father's death next month. She didn't think you'd have the nerve to come alone. The casual mention of my father stung, but I kept my composure. I'm not alone, actually. My husband will be joining me later. This caught Jessica off guard. Husband? You're married? To whom? You'll meet him soon enough, I replied, unwilling to reveal Daniel's identity just yet. Before Jessica could press further, we were interrupted by my father's brother William and his wife Linda. Is that little Sarah? Uncle William boomed, clearly. Already enjoying the open bar. Good Lord, we thought you'd disappeared entirely. Hello, Uncle William. Aunt Linda, I greeted them politely. Linda air-kissed near my cheek. Darling, where have you been hiding? Elaine tells us she hardly hears from you these days. The revisionist history was breathtaking. Elaine had practically evicted me after my father's death and had made zero effort to contact me since. I've been focused on my career, I said simply. Life gets busy. What sort of career could possibly keep you from family? William asked dismissively. Family is everything, dear girl. The irony was apparently lost on him. As we spoke, I noticed more relatives and old acquaintances glancing our way, whispering. Behind cocktail napkins. Elaine had rejoined Jessica and was speaking intently to her while looking in my direction. Then Elaine did something I didn't expect. She approached the small stage where the string quartet was playing and whispered to the conductor. He nodded and signaled for the music to stop. Ladies and gentlemen, Elaine's voice rang out over the sound system. I want to thank you all for coming tonight to support Boston Children's Hospital. Before dinner is served, I'd like to acknowledge all the wonderful staff who are making this evening possible, our event planners, our caterers, and our serving staff. There was polite applause as Elaine gestured around the room. Then her gaze landed deliberately on me. In fact, I think there's been a bit of confusion tonight. One of our wait staff seems to have gotten mixed up about the dress code. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the crowd as people turned to look at me. Sarah, dear, Elaine continued, her voice dripping with false concern, did you get confused about your role tonight? I know you expressed interest in helping, but guests weren't supposed to arrive until 7, and the serving staff was asked to use the service entrance. My face burned as understanding dawned. This was why she'd invited me, not to reconnect, but to publicly humiliate me in front of Boston's elite. Jessica stepped forward, her phone already in hand. Mom, maybe Sarah just wanted to see how the other half lives for one night. We should be flattered by her aspirations. More laughter rippled through the crowd, less uncomfortable now as the wealthy audience relaxed into the familiar territory of mockery disguised as humor. I stood frozen, champagne glass clutched in my hand. As Elaine continued her performance. Security, she called, gesturing to a man in a dark suit near the entrance. I believe we have someone who's confused about her place here tonight. Could you please escort her to the correct area, or perhaps just see her out if she's not actually on staff? The security guard looked uncomfortable but professional as he began making his way toward me. Around us, the circle of family members I'd grown up with watched with a mixture of amusement and satisfaction. My cousin Brandon, always eager to join in when someone was being targeted, called out from nearby. Always trying to be something. You're not, Sarah. Some things never change. Others joined in, their voices overlapping. Did she actually think she belonged here? Always had delusions of grandeur, that one. Probably crashed hoping to network. The security guard reached me, his expression apologetic but firm. Ma'am, I need to ask you to come with me. There seems to be some confusion. There's been a mistake, I managed, my voice smaller than I intended. I was invited. I have the invitation in my purse. Elaine approached us, Jessica trailing behind like an eager shadow. The mistake was mine, Sarah. I should have been clearer about boundaries. This event is for donors and hospital supporters, not, well, whatever it is you're doing these days. She turned to the security guard. Please see her out, gently, of course. She is family, after all. Technically speaking. Jessica openly filmed the interaction, barely containing her glee. This will make a great story for the family group chat. Sarah Matthews, daughter of Thomas Matthews, escorted from Charity Gala. Daddy would be so proud. The mention of my father broke something inside me. I felt tears threatening but refused to give them the satisfaction. The security guard took my elbow gently. Please, ma'am, let's not make this more difficult. Guests were openly staring now, some with pity, others with thinly veiled amusement. I looked around at the faces of my so-called family, cousins, aunts, uncles, people who had known me since childhood, and saw not one person willing to stand up for me. As the guard began guiding me toward the exit, I caught one last snippet of Elaine's voice addressing the curious onlookers. Family tragedy, really. Never quite found her place after her father died. We've tried to help, but some people simply don't belong in certain circles, no matter how desperately they try to force themselves in. I took one step toward the door, my dignity in tatters but determined not to break down in front of them. The humiliation was complete, exactly as Elaine had planned. Then everything changed. The ballroom doors swung open with authority, and Daniel Reed stepped into the room. At 6'3" with broad shoulders and natural command presence, he immediately drew attention even before people recognized who he was. Tonight, in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, he looked every inch the successful tech mogul, powerful, confident, and completely out of place in my family drama. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the unusual scene, me with a security guard's hand on my elbow, surrounded by Elaine, Jessica, and a circle of relatives with their phones out, filming what they clearly saw as entertainment. "Sarah," he called, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. The room went silent as Daniel strode purposefully across the ballroom. I watched recognition dawn on faces around me, first confusion, then shock. Daniel Reed wasn't just any businessman, he was one of Boston's most influential entrepreneurs and philanthropists, regularly featured on magazine covers and news programs. The security guard immediately dropped his hand from my arm, straightening his posture. "Sir, there seems to be some confusion. Sarah, what's going on?" Daniel asked, ignoring the guard completely and taking my hands in his. His touch was warm, steady, grounding me in the moment. Before I could answer, Elaine stepped forward, her social mask firmly back in place. "Mr. Reed. What an unexpected honor. I don't believe we've been formally introduced. I'm Elaine Matthews, chair of the foundation hosting tonight's gala." Daniel turned to her, his expression coolly professional. "Mrs. Matthews. I know exactly who you are." Something in his tone made Elaine falter slightly. "Well, yes, we're so pleased you could join us tonight. Though I'm afraid we were just dealing with a small situation. My wife appears to be surrounded by security and being filmed without her consent," Daniel interrupted, his voice level but firm. "That's the situation I'm concerned about." The word "wife" landed like a bomb in the silent ballroom. Jessica's mouth actually fell open, her phone still recording but now hanging limply at her side. "Wife?" Elaine repeated, looking rapidly between Daniel and me. "I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. Sarah is my stepdaughter, but she's not. We've been married for 2 years," Daniel stated flatly. "Though given the reception she's receiving, I understand why she's kept her connection to the Matthews family private from our social circle." The implications of his statement weren't lost on anyone within earshot. Daniel Reed, whose social circle included governors, senators, and international business leaders, found the Matthews family lacking, not the other way around. Jessica recovered first, stepping forward with a completely transformed expression. "Sarah, you should have told us." Her voice dripped with sudden sweetness. "What an amazing surprise." She moved as if to hug me, but Daniel subtly shifted his position, creating a barrier between us. "Interesting," he commented, glancing at the phone still in her hand. "You were filming my wife's humiliation moments ago, and now you want to embrace her?" Jessica had the grace to look embarrassed, quickly tucking her phone away. Uncle William pushed forward, hand extended toward Daniel. "William Matthews, Thomas's brother. Wonderful to meet you, Nathan. We've followed your success with great interest." Daniel ignored the outstretched hand. "Have you? That's surprising, considering you haven't shown interest in Thomas's daughter for years." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Public confrontations weren't the norm at these polished charity events, particularly not from someone of Daniel's stature. Elaine, ever the skilled social navigator, tried again. "There's clearly been a terrible misunderstanding. Sarah is, of course, a beloved member of our family. We had no idea she'd married someone of your prominence." "And that's exactly the problem, isn't it, Mrs. Matthews?" Daniel replied. "Sarah's value to you depends entirely on her connections and status, not on who she is as a person." By now, the entire ballroom was watching our exchange. The string quartet had stopped playing, and even the catering staff had paused their dinner preparations. "I think perhaps we should continue this conversation privately," Elaine suggested, casting nervous glances at the attentive audience. "I disagree," Daniel said calmly. "I think this is exactly the right setting for honesty, given what just transpired." He turned to address the wider crowd. "For those who don't know me, I'm Daniel Reed, founder of Reed Technologies and the Reed Foundation." Murmurs rippled through the audience at this confirmation. What many of you may not know, Daniel continued, is that the Reed Foundation is the anonymous benefactor behind tonight's event. Gasps and whispers erupted around us. Elaine's face drained of color. That's right, Daniel said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. My foundation provided the matching grant that made this gala possible, with the stipulation of anonymity because we believed in the cause, not the recognition. He turned back to Elaine. Imagine my surprise when my wife received an invitation from her estranged stepmother, who chairs the committee for an event my foundation is funding, an invitation that, it seems, was extended only so she could be publicly humiliated. That's not true, Elaine protested weakly. There's been a misunderstanding, I heard everything, Mrs. Matthews, Daniel cut her off. As did many others in this room. You called my wife's staff, suggested she crashed the event, encouraged security to remove her, while your daughter filmed it all for your entertainment. Jessica looked mortified, but Elaine was still scrambling to salvage the situation. Mr. Reed, Daniel, surely you understand that family dynamics can be complicated. Sarah has always been difficult. If we'd known she was your wife, then you would have treated her with the respect she deserves. Daniel finished for her. That's precisely the problem. No one should need my name or my money to be treated with basic human dignity, least of all by their own family. I found my voice at last, squeezing Daniel's hand. It's okay. You've made your point. He looked at me, his expression softening. Are you sure? Because I'm prepared to withdraw all foundation support from any initiative connected to the Matthews name. The threat hung in the air, its implications clear to everyone, especially Elaine, whose social standing and charitable work depended heavily on major donors like the Reed Foundation. That won't be necessary, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The hospital shouldn't suffer because of family drama. Elaine seemed to collapse with relief, but I wasn't finished. However, I continued, turning to face my stepmother directly, I think it's time for some changes in how the foundation operates. Daniel nodded, understanding immediately. The Reed Foundation will continue supporting Boston Children's Hospital, but will require a restructuring of the event committee moving forward. Mrs. Matthews, your leadership has been educational, but I believe fresh perspectives are needed. Several hospital board members in the crowd nodded in agreement, clearly unwilling to lose the Reed Foundation's substantial support over Elaine's social games. Elaine's carefully constructed facade cracked completely. You can't do that. The Matthews Family Foundation has chaired this event for 15 years. The Matthews Family Foundation exists because of my father's hard work, I reminded her. Work that I was systematically excluded from after his death. Consider this a long overdue course correction. Jessica stepped forward, desperation evident in her voice. Sarah, be reasonable. We're family. No, I interrupted firmly. We're not family. Family doesn't humiliate each other for sport. Family doesn't erase someone's existence when it's inconvenient. What we are is people who share a legal connection through my father. Nothing more. The brutal honesty of my statement silenced her completely. For perhaps the first time in her life, Jessica had no clever retort. One by one, relatives who had been eager to join in my humiliation moments before approached with awkward apologies and sudden reminiscences about how they'd always admired my independence. I received their overtures politely but without enthusiasm. Their transparent attempts at damage control were too little, too late. Daniel and I gradually made our way toward our assigned table, which, ironically, was at the front of the room. Placement befitting the event's major donor. As we moved through the crowd, I heard the whispers. Can you believe Elaine tried to throw out Daniel Reed's wife? Did you see Jessica filming it all? How mortifying. They say Sarah had no idea. Her husband was funding the event. Smart move keeping her maiden name professionally, proves she's not trading on his success. The evening proceeded with strained politeness. Elaine performed her duties as hostess mechanically, unable to meet my eyes during her speech thanking the generous anonymous donor, whose identity was now common knowledge. When dinner was served, Daniel leaned close to me. We can leave if you want. You've more than made your point. I considered it, then shook my head. Actually, I'd like to stay. For the first time, I'm at a family event entirely on my own terms. He smiled, understanding. Then we stay. But just so you know, you look absolutely stunning tonight. That dress was made for you. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. Better than a waitress uniform? Infinitely, he replied, raising his glass in a private toast. To my extraordinary wife, who needed neither my name nor my money to shine. I clinked my glass against his, finally able to see the evening for what it truly was, not a humiliation, but a liberation. The days following the gala brought a flurry of calls, emails, and even handwritten notes, all from family members suddenly eager to reconnect with their long-lost relative. I recognized these overtures for what they were: damage control, not genuine remorse. Cousin Brandon sent flowers to the gallery today, I told Daniel that evening as we relaxed in our living room. The card said he values family above all else and hopes we can rebuild our connection. Daniel raised an eyebrow. The same Brandon who said you never belonged in the family? The very same, I confirmed, curling more comfortably into the couch. Amazing how quickly perspectives change when money and influence enter the equation. What did you do with the flowers? Daniel asked. Donated them to the children's ward at the hospital, I replied. Seemed fitting. The most surprising development came 3 days after the gala, when my father's sister Catherine, who had maintained careful neutrality during Elaine's reign, requested to meet for coffee. Unlike the others, Catherine had never been actively cruel, just passively absent. I agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe near the gallery. She arrived looking nervous, clutching her purse like a shield. Thank you for seeing me, Sarah, she began after ordering her coffee. I owe you an apology, one that has nothing to do with your husband or his position. I waited, curious about where this was going. I knew what Elaine was doing to you after Robert died, she admitted, her voice tight with regret. I saw how she isolated you, how she manipulated the family narrative to paint you as difficult and ungrateful. And I did nothing. The raw honesty surprised me. Why? I asked simply, Catherine sighed. Cowardly reasons. Fear of confrontation, fear of being excluded myself. But also because I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. I was wrong. When we see injustice in our family and stay silent, we become complicit. Her words resonated more deeply than any of the shallow apologies I'd received. Thank you for saying that, I said quietly. I don't expect forgiveness, Catherine continued, but I want you to know that not everyone believed Elaine's version of events. Some of us were just too weak to stand against her. We talked for nearly 2 hours. Catherine shared stories about my father that I'd never heard, how he'd struggled with depression after my mother died, how he'd been manipulated by Elaine but had always kept photos of me in his private office, away from her disapproving eyes. He loved you, Sarah, Catherine insisted. His biggest failure was not protecting you from Elaine, and I think that shame made it harder for him to connect with you as you got older. It wasn't complete healing, but it was something. A small piece of my father returned to me through honest conversation. As the weeks passed, Daniel and I made decisions about which family relationships were worth salvaging. Catherine became a regular presence in our lives, along with 2 cousins who reached out with genuine remorse rather than opportunistic networking attempts. Elaine and Jessica were conspicuously silent after their initial flurry of damage control messages went unanswered. According to Catherine, they were facing significant social fallout. Several board members had requested Elaine's resignation from various foundations, and Jessica's social media influence had taken a hit when clips of her filming my humiliation circulated among Boston's elite. I took no pleasure in their difficulties, but I felt no obligation to rescue them either. Some bridges, once burned, should remain uncrossed. The most meaningful development came 6 months after the gala, when Daniel and I established the Robert Matthews Art Therapy Foundation, dedicated to providing creative healing programs for children dealing with grief and family trauma. We're not just reclaiming your father's name, Daniel observed as we finalized the foundation documents. We're redirecting it towards something that would have made him proud. At the foundation's launch event, a much smaller, warmer gathering than Elaine's ostentatious galas, I found myself surrounded by people who valued connection over status, compassion over social climbing. Catherine was there, along with Daniel's parents and sister, and friends who had stood by me through years of family estrangement. During my speech that evening, I shared parts of my own journey, not for sympathy, but to highlight why our mission mattered. Art saved me during my darkest moments, I told the attentive audience. When I felt voiceless and invisible, creativity gave me a language to express what I couldn't say aloud. Every child deserves that outlet, that safe space to process difficult emotions. I didn't mention Elaine or the gala incident specifically, but I did address the broader lesson it had taught me. Family isn't just about blood or legal connections, I said, looking around at the supportive faces before me. It's about who shows up, not just for celebrations and success, but during struggles and setbacks. It's about who sees your worth even when you can't see it yourself. Later that evening, as Daniel and I walked home along the Charles River, I felt a sense of peace I'd been chasing for years. You know what the strangest part is? I mused, watching the moonlight play on the water. I spent so many years thinking I needed their approval to be whole. I thought if I could just make them see my worth, I'd finally feel complete. And now? Daniel prompted gently. I smiled, squeezing his hand. Now I realize I was already whole. Their approval or disapproval doesn't define me, it never did. I just needed to believe that myself. Daniel stopped walking and turned to face me. I've always believed it. From that first day at the gallery, when you spent an hour educating me about emerging artists without having any idea who I was or what I was worth financially. You were just passionate about art and helping others succeed. You mean when I was just doing my job? I teased. You were doing much more than a job, he corrected. You were championing other people's dreams with such genuine enthusiasm that I couldn't help falling in love with you right then. We continued our walk in comfortable silence, the city lights reflecting on the river beside us. I thought about the long journey from that broken-hearted teenager being pushed out of her family home to the woman I was now, strong, loved, and finally free from the weight of seeking validation from those incapable of giving it. The Gala confrontation hadn't given me the family I'd longed for as a child. Instead, it had given me something more valuable, the freedom to create my own definition of family, to build connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation or status. If you're watching this and struggling with family rejection or conditional love, please know that your worth isn't determined by those who fail to see it. Sometimes the family we create for ourselves, through friendships, marriage, mentorship, can heal the wounds left by the family we were born into. Don't give up on finding your people, the ones who will value you for exactly who you are, not what you can do for them or how you make them look. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to diminish you? Or have you found your chosen family more supportive than your biological one? Share your experiences. Your story might help someone else going through something similar. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more tales about overcoming toxic family dynamics and finding your worth. Remember, sometimes the greatest act of self-love is walking away from those who can't love you properly, even when they share your name. Thank you for listening to my story.